Well, Scully, we've looked at death from a lot of different perspectives, haven't we?
There's still one more perspective.
Oh, and what's that?
The one in which you're food!
In 1985, the ecofeminist philosopher Val Plumwood was canoeing in Kakadu National Park in Australia's Northern Territory, deep in the Australian outback. And she was attacked by a saltwater crocodile that took her through 3 death rolls. So the way that a crocodile typically will kill its prey is by dragging it underwater and drowning it. This is known as a death roll. And Plumwood was able to get free of the death roll once, a second time, and then a third time was able to get out of the water, and the crocodile let her escape. She wasn't sure after the fact what it was that had changed, how it is that the crocodile allowed her to escape. But she then had to crawl several miles with a severely lacerated leg until she was found by a park ranger who managed to get her to safety. She had an extended stay in a hospital. It is more than a small miracle that she survived. And it took her some time after the fact to write publicly about her experience. Her first public piece of writing on the topic, published about a decade after the attack, was an article called Human Vulnerability and the Experience of Being Prey. She, at the time of her death, was working on a book called The Eye of the Crocodile that looked a bit deeper at this experience, at this encounter, and how it had shifted her sense of her own relatedness to nature. And Plumwood died before the book was published. It was published posthumously with only 2.5 chapters complete. But it gives an account of how Plumwood sees herself as having gone through the eye of the crocodile, as she puts it, and seen herself and her world from an entirely different perspective. So what is it that Plumwood comes to recognize through the eye of the crocodile? Well, in effect, what she comes to realize is that she is food. Now, in some sense, this shouldn't be a surprise to her or to anybody else. We all know that humans are animal beings, that we're made of flesh. That flesh can nourish other animals, and even if we don't get eaten by a crocodile, when we die, our decomposing bodies are food for small organisms like insects and worms and various bacteria and other microorganisms. None of this is news. And yet, Plumwood remarks on the sense of shock in being confronted by this fact as the crocodile bore down on her. She describes a sense of mistaken identity, a sense that she discovered with a thunderclap that she had been wrong about everything before that moment. And part of what's interesting to me about this is that Plumwood is an ecofeminist philosopher. She has committed herself professionally to deconstructing the kinds of hierarchies that separate humans from other animals, separate humans from nature. She thinks not only is it philosophically a mistake, but also ethically a mistake to see oneself as a human being as somehow apart from the rest of nature. Nevertheless, somebody with those philosophical commitments was still able to find herself surprised in this moment. She writes about a sense that there must be some kind of case of mistaken identity in the crocodile mistaking her for something that could just be eaten like that. And so she recognizes that despite her philosophical commitments, she has internalized this idea that lies deep within all of us, that humans are somehow special, distinct, aren't to be eaten. And what changes for her is that recognition that as a living being, she is part of an ecosystem, and that in an ecosystem, every organism feeds, and every organism is food, and that there is no freeing ourselves from that ecosystem without, in some sense, denying our own very nature. So the illusion that Plumwood sees herself as having fallen victim to, in spite of herself, is one that she calls human nature dualism. The idea that the human is, first of all, in some sense, fundamentally separate from and even opposed to nature. And second of all, that the human is the dominant side of this human nature pairing, that the human side is dominant and the nature side is subordinate, so that as human beings, we have this superiority with regard to nature. And part of what is important to Plumwood as an ecofeminist philosopher is to recognize that there are a number of these kinds of binaries where one side of a pairing is constructed or construed as superior or dominant, and the other side is constructed as subordinate, and that various kinds of dualisms then mutually reinforce one another. So, for example, As an ecofeminist philosopher, the male-female gender binary is of particular significance to Plumwood. The idea that the male gender is constructed as dominant in a way that then constructs the female gender as subordinate. And the male-female dualism is then reinforced by and connected with a number of other different kinds of dualisms. So there's often racial binaries where white people often are constructed as superior and dominant, whereas non-white races are often constructed as subordinate, so that there are various kinds of racial and gender-based forms of oppression that reinforce one another. Within the realm of gender oppression, there are binaries between reason and emotion, where reason is construed as masculine, emotion as feminine, and reason is therefore superior to emotion. There's the public and the private, so that the realm of the public is the masculine realm of reason, and the private is the realm of the feminine emotion. And for Plumwood, then, the human nature binary is tied into all of these. So that, for example, women as more emotional, less part of the public sphere of reason, are also closer to nature. And so the feminine, the emotional, the natural all need to be subordinated to the masculine human reason, which has a superior position in relation to it. So a lot of Plumwood's career is devoted to deconstructing these binaries, of showing how there's all sorts of oppression and dominance that's built into them, how they're based upon philosophical shoddy foundations. And so she has devoted a lot of her work to this. And one of the things then again that is interesting about her work in The Eye of the Crocodile is recognizing how she herself, nevertheless, had still some sense of her own superiority to nature as a human being. And that one of the things that she was forced to confront in this moment of the crocodile attack was that she too was still, in some sense, tied to certain structures of dominance and hierarchy that she found problematic both philosophically and morally. Now, Plumwood isn't saying anything quite so crude as, look, we're all just food, get over it, and accept that there's nothing special about human beings. Instead, what she's trying to do is draw attention to the fact that the idea that other animals might be seen to be simply food and so they're not that important, so just get over it, is part of the problem. That in setting up human beings as somehow special and apart from and superior to the rest of nature, we have also degraded and devalued the other organisms, the animals, the plants, and the rest of the ecosystem that we are a part of. And so she thinks that by getting rid of this human nature dualism, we can, on one hand, take a more ecological view of ourselves while also taking a more ethical view of non-human nature. So she thinks that these two projects go hand in hand. That what we need to do is, on one hand, recognize that we are a part of an ecosystem, that we are food, that we do feed, but that this doesn't mean that we are to degrade ourselves so much as to raise up the rest of nature, to recognize that just like us, other animals are food, other animals need to eat, and that we and they exist in a state of kinship where we are all food to one another and we all feed on one another. And there's a recognition then that maybe deep in the ethical perspective that she wants us to take, that we need to recognize ourselves as in various ways being useful to the ecosystem. That if we are part of the ecosystem, we take from it, but we also give back. And one of the deepest ways in which we can give back is that we as animal organisms have these bodies that can be returned to nature. And it's not so much that she's just saying, when you die, let other animals eat you. She's saying something deeper, I think. She's saying, come to think of yourself as an organism that is a part of an ecosystem that has something that it can contribute to that ecosystem. And that won't just affect your decision about what you do with your body after you die. It will also affect your sense of what you might do with yourself while you are alive. If these videos have been food for thought for you, I encourage you to like this video and to follow my YouTube channel.
See you later, alligators.
In a while, crocodile.